Recording in progress.
Good morning and welcome to the March 16th Victim Compensation Board meeting. For those of you in the room that are appearing on a specific agenda item or wish to offer public comment, the microphones at the podium and tables are directional and require that you hold them fairly close to your mouth when speaking to ensure your testimony is captured by our audio equipment. For members and participants who are appearing via Zoom, if you cannot hear the presenter, please use the comment feature to note that as staff are monitoring the comments in real time. And just a housekeeping matter, item 8 on the agenda, the Chewinski claim, will be continued to May at the claimant's request, so we won't be discussing that item today. Council, would you please call the roll?
Member Becton.
Present.
Member Johnson.
Present.
Chair Ravel.
Present.
Good morning. Item 1 is the approval of the minutes for the January 19, 2023 board meeting.
Is there any discussion, additions, or corrections to the minutes from board members? Do I have a motion to approve item 1?
I move approval of the January 19th, 2023 minutes.
Call for a second.
I second.
Is there any public comment for this item?
Seeing none, council, please call the roll.
Motion before the board is approval of the January 18th, 2023 board meeting minutes. Member Becton.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
The next item is public comment. Item 2, this is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. As any items discussed during public comment have not been agendized, the board is not permitted to take any action on these matters at this meeting. Please note, if you wish to offer public comment regarding items 5, through 9, there will be a separate call for public comment when each item is heard by the board. For those on the phone, if you previously indicated your desire to offer comments, during this meeting, we will be calling on you by name or phone number. For those participating via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to offer comment, and we will acknowledge you and let you know when it is your turn to speak. Seeing none. Item 3 is the Executive Officer's statement, which will be presented by Executive Officer Linda Gledhill.
Thank you. Just after our January board meeting, California experienced 2 horrific mass shooting events. The shootings in Monterey Park and Half Moon Bay were tragic incidents that left behind countless victims. Cal VCB reacted immediately to both of those incidents, working with our local partners to make sure that the victims, including the families of the deceased, the injured, and those that were witnesses, received the help that they needed and knew that they could apply for Cal VCB benefits. We've been working continuously since those incidents to follow up and assess what we can do to help those victims. In both places, there have been significant language and cultural barriers. We are working with both the State Department of Civil Rights and local community leaders to make sure accurate information is provided to members of the community. For example, there was quite a bit of confusion about how GoFundMe accounts work with Cal VCB benefits. We clarified that victims can receive GoFundMe money and CalVCB benefits, but that the CalVCB benefits cannot be used for expenses that were already paid by a GoFundMe account. To date, we've received 27 applications from Monterey Park victims and 44 applications from Half Moon Bay victims. We continue to outreach to these areas to remind victims that they have 7 years from the time of the incident to apply for CalVCB benefits. And again, we continue to work with local community leaders to make sure that they understand how CalVCB works and to help them get applications in. In cases like these, CalVCB is also the entity that would apply for an anti-terrorism and emergency assistance program grant, or AEAP. These grants provide extra money to local communities to help with ongoing costs related to mass violence events. We continue the conversation with the local communities and with the federal government to see if they would benefit from that grant and whether or not CalVCB will be applying for one. We'll certainly keep the board members posted on that. The mass violence events, tragic as they were, showcased how the work we've been doing to coordinate with our state partners who also help victims of crime can really come to bear to help victims. You may recall that last year I convened the State Victims Coordination Council in order to bring together all state entities that help victims of crime. And within hours of the both events, and especially Monterey Park, even on a Sunday morning, many of us were coordinating our outreach and making sure that those of us in state government were talking to each other so that we could best serve the victims on the ground. This coordination council continues to meet and talk about how we can work together. And we plan to increase our coordinated outreach in the coming months as a way to amplify the work that we do here at the state level. As I've mentioned before, we are now into the second year of our 2-year forced or involuntary sterilization compensation program, which is set to expire at the end of this year. And as required by statute, we recently submitted our first annual report to the legislature outlining the work so far. We continue to work hard to get word out about the program and to reach the estimated 600 or so survivors of forced sterilization. To date, we have received 389 applications and have approved 65. We know that there are likely more survivors out there, and we continue to do everything we can to reach them. Finally, I want to preview that in late April, we will be marking Crime Victims' Rights Week and Denim Day. These are important dates on the calendar in which we highlight the work that is done to help victims. Like last year, CalVCB staff will be hosting a denim drive to help a local nonprofit, and I look forward to telling you more about our achievements at our May board meeting. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks for that update, Officer Gledhill. Are there any questions or comments from board members?
Seeing none, we'll move to item 4, which is the legislative update, which will also be presented by Executive Officer Linda Gledhill.
Thank you. As you know, the legislature returned to work in January, and the report in your binders reflects that they have been very busy introducing bills. One note that since the binder was printed, AB 335, which would have repealed Prop 47, has been amended and no longer contains provisions related to CalVCB. Hearings on all of these bills start in the next few weeks, and we will continue to monitor them as they go through the lengthy legislative process. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Officer Gledhill. We see a lot of repeats and continued interest in the work that you're doing. So thanks for that. Are there any questions or comments from the board?
Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, we'll move to item 5, is the contract update, which will be presented by Executive Officer Linda Gledhill.
Thank you. For your approval in the contract report is the CalVCB contract with the Government Operations Agency in the amount of $300,000. This contract is for administrative services, including but not limited to legal, budget, personnel, legislative and information technology services, and policy and communication oversight. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have and ask for your approval of the Government Operations Agency contract.
Thank you, Officer Gledhill. I want to note for purposes of the minutes that I'm an employee of the Government Operations Agency, and So pursuant to Government Code 1091, I will be recusing for myself from this item. I don't know procedurally who's best to have call the motion. Council, would you do that, please? Thank you.
Do we have a motion on item 5?
I move to approve.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none.
The motion before the board is approval of the executive officer's execution of item 1 of the contract report, the contract with the Government Operations Agency in the amount of $300,000. Member Becton,
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Item 6 is the proposal to approve Trauma Recovery Center Grant Award, which will be presented by Chief Deputy Executive Officer Natalie Mack.
Good morning. CalVCB is charged with administering this directional microphone. CalVCB is charged with administering the Trauma Recovery Center grant process. We function on a 2-year cycle. And in this cycle, I'm never told I'm quiet, so this is interesting. And in this cycle, we have the proposal today. As a little bit of background, there is no limit to the amount of funding that can be requested. There is no guarantee of funding, whether you were previously funded or not. And we have made certain considerations based on feedback that's been previously provided by legislators who've been interested in this effort. Specifically, information related to geographic distribution and making sure that there's coverage. To that end, legislators provided additional one-time funding in the last year to raise the floor to 1.1 million per TRC, which allowed for obviously more services and throughout the existing TRCs. Additionally, funding was provided to establish satellite offices, again, addressing more coverage and more services. For those interested, this funding for this granting process, $2 million comes from restitution, 10% comes from Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act, save annually, and also is adjusted annually based on May revise. So we introduced the NOFA and got applications. The process of scoring the NOFA has been rather consistent. We take the minimum qualifications as outlined in statute. Grantees who have applied and meet the minimum qualifications then are scored through a narrative process of additional questions that make considerations for things like geography, timeliness, how quickly they'd be able to get up and running. And then we score and make a recommendation. Addressing geographic distribution, there's a graphic that will display, and I gave you all a printout so you could see it. That graphic shows you that within the state of California, there are populations of trauma recovery centers that are seemingly clustered. However, we are somewhat limited by where the grantees come from, where the applicants come from. So when we look to do our funding recommendation, as was provided in your binders, part of that is meant to address not just the geography, but trying to maintain the continuity of the centers that are already in place. With that, our funding recommendation employed a process that in this time created a cap of 1.1 million per year. In statute, there is no cap. And if we do not address that in some way, we are limited into what we can do because there's a finite amount of money. In this cycle, we had over nearly $42 million in requested grant funds. We have about $20 million to distribute. So with that, we have created a tiered approach, which allows for us to more evenly distribute the funds, maintain the continuity throughout the state, and fund the most TRCs. In this interest, the only TRC that is not being recommended is one who did not meet minimum qualifications. As is provided in your book, there is a funding recommendation, and the request is to both, excuse me, the request is to both approve the Trauma Recovery Center grant awards as recommended and further authorize staff to increase or decrease the awards as necessary to reflect the funds available following release of the governor's revised budget in May.
Thanks very much. I appreciate all the work that you've put into this to ensure a fair geographic distribution and continuity of services. And it's good that we've got those satellite awards that were just given out so that the Central Valley is represented too. Do I have a motion to approve item 6? Or excuse me, actually, we have discussion first. Is there any discussion from the board regarding the TRC award?
Thanks for all this great work. Really remarkable to see the effort that's gone into it and the efforts to maintain, as you said, the geographic diversity as well as the continuity of care. Oh, I need to be closer apparently, or this needs to be closer to me, one or the other. All right, let's do both. So the only question I had is, obviously there are going to, there remain areas that are underserved on this map. And you're limited to the applications that come in the door. I understand that, but what efforts are undertaken or can be undertaken if they're not currently to make sure that places, say in the north part of the state, are have some representation on this map in the future? Because obviously the services that are there, they're great. If we can expand them and make them more geographically diverse in their availability, that seems like a win for everybody.
Thank you. One of the things that the team did this year was send out a mass mailing to all of the hospitals, community-based organizations, both throughout the whole state, not just in northern and southern, but specifically targeting some of the central locations and advising them that the process for applying for that the NOFA had been released, that these trauma recovery centers are, able to be funded with grant funding. Part of it is just an outreach effort. And again, the legislator did a great job of providing some additional funding that allowed for some satellite offices. Those were specifically directed towards those areas that are underserved, Central Valley and outskirts. And so those are also being
So I guess the follow-up would be, is there a way, and this is not an official request, just so curious if there's a way to think about or assess where the greatest need is versus where these centers are currently, to identify those gaps if it hasn't been done before. And I apologize for my ignorance. It's new to the board here.
No worries. So we do have outreach efforts that are underway, and we're working to try to figure out crime rates versus, uptick usage within CalVCB, but specific to trauma recovery centers, we have to have someone who's going to operate it. So what we'll be doing is utilizing the outreach to try to figure out what those areas are and then potentially marketing differently so that we can try to just reach a vast majority. I don't know that we have a direct impact to be able to, force is the wrong word, but we definitely want to spread the word so that people know that we're here and these funds are available and hopefully take advantage of them, especially in those areas that are underserved.
There additional comments or discussion from the board? Okay. And do I have a motion to approve item 6?
I move to approve the proposed Regional Trauma Recovery Center grant awards as recommended. And
there's some questions actually from the crowd.
Call for a second.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item? I do see one person's hand raised. Brianna, if you can go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to make a public comment on this item. So I am from the All of You TRC. I would just like to make sure that the board is aware of the very concrete impact of the funding cuts that are being proposed. In the current proposal, many of the existing TRCs will have their funding cut. We just received a funding increase from CalVCB in July when it was stated that the minimum budget per annually should be 1.1 million per year. So we received those funds and we were very grateful to receive them in July, and we were able to upscale ours, add additional staff. And since that time, we've been able to greatly decrease the waiting list that we have for victim services here that our TRC provides. And so that's been really helpful for us. With the current proposal and the current cut to our budget, we will now have to lay off that additional staff that we just brought on. And the subsequent impact on the victims will be that the wait lists will again increase. And so I just want to make sure that, the board is aware of, the impact, both to the TRCs and then the downstream impact to the clients and the victims. That said, I would also just like to mention that, we have been in existence, and my TRC has been in existence only for 2 years. This is about the 5th or 6th different budget that we've had to either upscale to or downscale to. And it's, that, kind of change that we've had to adapt to. And, every time there's a new budget, we have to adapt our operations. It's very difficult. And, the impact of that really is that administratively, our attention is then diverted to dealing with the budgets, dealing with adapting the staffing and adapting our operations. And it really diverts our attention away from the victims and, being able to provide high quality care to the victims, which, I think we can all agree is really what the TRCs are meant for. And so I would just hope that the board takes that in mind in the vote today, but also really thinks about, ways in which potentially CalVCB and the TRCs could work together over, the coming months, the coming years to make sure that this process, is not so much of a roller coaster, because what we really need to function well is consistency and, in terms of the budget and just consistency from CalVCB so that we can make sure that we provide high quality services. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
I don't see anyone else.
Thanks very much for your comment. And if I could encourage staff to take that into account. I realize you're dealing with limited resources and that you have a lot of candidate or applicants that meet the MQs, and you have to figure out a way to distribute the funds evenly. But to the extent possible, to have some consistency for the reasons described would be great. Council, would you please call the roll?
I believe we may have another public.
Oh, we do.
Given
Okay.
that we have someone on screen, I want to check with our technical folks first to determine that before we call for the vote. Okay. Thank you. The motion before the board is approval of the proposed Trauma Recovery Center grant awards as recommended, and authority for staff to increase or decrease the awards as necessary to reflect funds available following the governor's revised budget in May. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 7 is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Daniel Larson, which will be presented by Chief Counsel Kim Gutierrez.
On September 8th of 2014, Daniel Larson filed an application as erroneously convicted felon with the California Victim Compensation Board. That application was based on his 1999 three strikes conviction for possessing a concealed dirk or dagger. That conviction was vacated and dismissed during federal habeas proceedings in June of 2010. This matter includes a long procedural history, which is very detailed in the proposed decision. As mandated by court order pursuant to Penal Code Section 1485.55, The proposed decision recommends compensation in the amount of $736,540, which represents $140 per day for each of the 5,261 days Mr. Larson was wrongfully imprisoned. Throughout these proceedings, Mr. Larson has been represented by Alexander Simpson of the California Innocence Project, and the Office of the Attorney General is represented by Deputy Attorney General Dina Petroshenko.
Thank you, Counsel. We'll hear first from Mr. Simpson representing Mr. Larson.
Thank you and good morning to the board. My name is Alexander Simpson. I am the Associate Director for the California Innocence Project. As was said by Ms. Gauthier, I was and have been Mr. Larson's attorney for the last 15 years, both in his wrongful conviction, quest to have his wrongful conviction overturned, and also for the purposes of compensation. I'm very happy that we have arrived at today. This resolution is extremely meaningful for Mr. Larson. It is really going to change his entire life, and it is a long time coming. I know that he is very thankful to have the board's consideration today. I would be remiss if I did not mention that this was a team effort. I would love to take credit for the only person getting to this spot would be me. I know that's not true. I just want to thank a couple of people, Caitlin Weisberg from McKay, Bednarski and Litt, Ben Simonu from Singleton Schreiber, Mike Samanchik, who was a law student when we first started this quest, and now he is an attorney in my office. And notably, a couple of people, one of whom is here today, Melissa O'Connell from the Northern California Innocence Project, and Jasmine Harris from my office, part of the California Innocence Coalition, who were instrumental in making sure that Mr. Larson could appear before you today. And if it wasn't for their work, this board would not be considering this claim. So Mr. Larson is absolutely in gratitude to this board. Thank you so much on behalf of our office for the consideration.
Thanks, Mr. Simpson. I don't think Mr. Larson is in attendance, is he?
He is not. I spoke to him earlier. He has some medical issues that are preventing him from being here today.
Okay, thank you. So we will hear next from Ms. Petroshenko from the Attorney General's office.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am jumping in here at the end of this case. I don't have comments to add other than there is obviously no objection to the board hearing this claim and the action the board is going to be taking today. I can answer any questions if the board should have any for me. Otherwise, I'm prepared to submit.
Thank you, Ms. Petroshenko. Is there any discussion on this item by the board? Seeing none, do I have a motion on item 7?
I move to adopt the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Daniel Larson.
Call for a second.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item?
Seeing none, counsel, would you please call the roll?
Motion before the board is the adoption of the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Daniel Larson. Member Becton.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Because of the continuance for item 8, we'll move to item 9, which is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Darwin Crabtree, which will be presented by Chief Counsel Kim Gauthier.
On October 18th of 2022, we received Darwin Crabtree's application as a Penal Code Section 4900 erroneously convicted felon. That application is based on his 1991 convictions related to child sexual abuse. Those convictions were vacated in January of 2018 by the Butte County Superior Court based on newly discovered evidence of actual innocence. As there was no objection filed by the Office of the Attorney General, compensation is automatic under Penal Code Section 4900 subsection B. Accordingly, the proposed decision recommends compensation in the amount of $440,020, which represents $140 per day for each of the 3,143 days that Mr. Crabtree was wrongfully convicted. Mr. Crabtree is represented in these proceedings by Paige Canop of the Northern California Innocence Project, and the Office of the Attorney General is represented by Deputy Attorney General Jessica Leal.
Thank you, Council. We'll hear first from Ms. Canop representing Mr. Crabtree.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm too short for this. So Darwin Crabtree came to us with the evidence of innocence in his hands. His children as adults had come to him and said they'd known about his innocence, and they explained in their own words and written statements that they had notarized how an unlicensed therapist had coerced them when they were young, impressionable children going through a traumatic time into falsely accusing their father. And we interviewed them, and they were so credible. They're wonderful men like their father. And they're adamant. They have been always adamant throughout their adult years that their father is innocent. And Mr. Crabtree had kept everything, including the tapes of their childhood interviews. And we were able to listen to those and, more importantly, give them to an expert who could analyze them. And as he wrote in his report, those interviews used every technique that we now know elicits false accusations. So everything pointed to his innocence. And we had just one problem, and that's that he had already served his time. He had done his time in prison. He had served his parole. And when he came to us with all of this evidence, the law required that you have standing to challenge your wrongful conviction by being in custody still. And so we had to ask him to do the impossible, and that was to keep waiting and to register under 290, which came with getting his picture plastered over work sites, losing jobs, this taint on his reputation. And Mr. Crabtree endured that with incredible grace until finally the law changed and we were able to bring the evidence of his innocence to the court. And the state actually has been wonderful throughout this. They approached his case with a very open mind. They interviewed him and his sons. They told him they believed him. They apologized to him. And they joined us in asking the court to vacate his wrongful conviction. And when the court did so, they dismissed all of the charges. And when we asked for compensation, as you know, they did not object. And while no amount of money will ever fix what Mr. Crabtree and his sons, his whole family, his wife, who stood by him all this time, is here, nothing will ever fix that. But we do at least get to compensate him for his time erroneously convicted. And so we urge you to adopt the proposed decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Canop. Mr. Crabtree, would you like to address the board?
Just briefly, thank you for the opportunity to address you. And thanks for the opportunity to be able to come here and apply for compensation. She said, as Paige, it's been a long time.
Can I just ask you to speak a little?
I'm sorry, a little closer? Okay. It's been a long time coming. I was counting the years today, almost 32 years as of December. And, you know, if this board adopts to go ahead and grant compensation, I want to say the same thing that I said directly to the district attorney and the deputy attorney that investigated the case. Not only was I an accused and wrongfully convicted felon, but once exonerated, I was also part of the community in the state of California. And I'm thankful for the decision and the integrity of the DA's office had in making that decision to overturn the case. And in this instance, we've worked hard for compensation with this, and I would say the same thing to the board. They choose to grant, I say thank you, in my opinion, for doing the right thing. And I say that also because, you know, in 2019, I lobbied here with the Innocence Project, met with numerous representatives. Because at that time, I had no standing for compensation, even though I had been exonerated. I had no standing for compensation. It's been one battle after the other to get the laws up to date, to recognize the holes in the system. And so again, I'm just thankful. been a long time. I'm thankful this represents the end. And I'm thankful for that and for me, and it's a lot for my kids as well to see this end. Thank you.
Thank you for appearing before us, Mr. Crabtree. We'll hear now from Jessica Leal from the Attorney General's office.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I reviewed Mr. Crabtree's case myself, reviewed the merits, and I investigated the case. I did not interview Mr. Crabtree or his children, but I did speak to the district attorney who handled the case below at length. And suffice it to say that the Attorney General does not have any objections to compensation today. And I am personally glad to see this day come for Mr. Crabtree. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leal. Is there any discussion on this item from the board? Seeing none, do I have a motion on item 9?
I move to adopt the hearing officer's proposed decision.
I second.
Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none.
Council, please call the roll.
Motion before the board is adoption of the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Darwin Crabtree. Member Becton,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
The board will now convene into closed session under Government Code Section 1126 sub A to discuss a personnel matter, and under sub C3 to discuss numbers 1 through 91 of the Victim Compensation Program. Board is reconvening into public session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126 sub C3. Do I have a motion for numbers 1 through 91 of the Victim Compensation Program?
I move approval of numbers 1 through 91 of the Victim Compensation Program.
Call for a second.
Nice second.
Council, please call the roll.
Member Becton,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Is there any other business that needs to come before the board today? I don't see any. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Council, please call the roll.
Member Becton,
Aye.
Member Johnson,
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The next meeting is scheduled to occur on May 18th, 2023.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.